The night wind carried a bitter chill through the narrow streets of Brooklyn, where shadows danced beneath flickering streetlights. A scraggly orange tabby cat, known to the neighborhood as Rusty, moved silently through the darkness, his keen eyes scanning the ground for his next meal. The routine was always the same, searching through discarded takeout containers and forgotten scraps, until a sound stopped him dead in his tracks. A soft whimper, barely audible above the distant hum of traffic, caught his attention. Rusty's ears twitched, his whiskers sensing a change in the air. The sound came again, this time clearer, more desperate. It wasn't the usual urban symphony of rats scurrying or pigeons cooing. This was different. This was human. The cat crept forward, guided by instinct rather than thought. Behind a stack of cardboard boxes in a dimly lit alley, he found the source. A tiny bundle wrapped in a thin, dirty blanket. As Rusty approached, the bundle moved slightly, revealing a small, red face. A baby, no more than a few weeks old, lay abandoned among the refuse of the city. Rusty had seen many things in his years on the streets, but nothing like this. The baby's cries were growing weaker, its tiny body shivering in the cold night air. Something stirred in the old cat's heart, a memory, perhaps, of warmth and kindness from long ago before the streets became his home. Without hesitation, Rusty began his work. He knew of a place, a house with warm lights and kind voices, where an elderly couple, the Hendersons, would leave food for the neighborhood strays. They had tried to adopt him many times, but Rusty had always maintained his independence, until now. The cat grabbed the edge of the blanket between his teeth and began to pull. The bundle was heavy, impossibly so for a creature his size, but Rusty persisted. Inch by inch, he dragged the baby through the alley, taking frequent breaks to ensure his precious cargo was secure. His muscles strained with every step, but something deep within drove him forward. Sarah Henderson was having trouble sleeping that night. At 72, sleepless nights weren't uncommon, but something felt different about this one. She sat in her favorite armchair by the window, watching the street below, while her husband George snored softly in the bedroom upstairs. The porch light cast a warm glow on their small front yard, where a collection of bowls sat waiting for their nightly visitors. A movement caught her eye. Through the glass, she saw Rusty, the stubborn orange cat they'd been trying to bring indoors for months, struggling with something at the edge of their property. Sarah squinted, trying to make out what the cat was dragging. It looked too large to be his usual prey. When she opened the front door, the sight before her made her blood run cold. There, illuminated by the porch light, was a baby, still wrapped in its thin blanket, with Rusty standing guard beside it. The cat meowed urgently, as if saying, "I've brought you something important, help." Sarah's trembling hands reached for her phone to call 911, but as she did, she noticed something else, a small piece of paper tucked into the blanket. With shaking fingers, she unfolded it, revealing words that would change everything. "His name is Michael. Please keep him safe. They're watching." The emergency response team arrived within minutes, bathing the quiet suburban street in flashing red and blue lights. Sarah Henderson stood on her porch, clutching the mysterious note while paramedics examined the infant. George had joined her downstairs, his arm wrapped protectively around his wife's shoulders as they watched the scene unfold. Rusty remained nearby, perched on the porch railing, his amber eyes never leaving the baby. Detective Lisa Chen arrived shortly after C, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the scene. She was a veteran of the missing persons unit, but something about this case felt different. The baby, Michael, according to the note, was healthy despite his ordeal, showing signs of recent care. This wasn't a simple abandonment. Someone had been looking after him until very recently. "Mrs. Henderson," Detective Chen began, her voice gentle but professional, "can you tell me exactly what happened?" As Sarah recounted the events, the detective's attention was drawn to Rusty, who had moved closer to the baby whenever anyone approached. The cat's behavior was unusual, almost protective. "We'll need to take him to the hospital for examination," one of the paramedics announced, preparing to load the baby into the ambulance. That's when Rusty did something extraordinary. He jumped down from his perch and positioned himself between the paramedics and the baby, his fur bristling. "Wait," Sarah said, a thought forming in her mind. "Detective, is there any way, could we accompany Michael to the hospital? The cat, Rusty. He seems to know something. I know it sounds crazy, but I've never seen him act like this." Detective Chen considered the request. In her 15 years on the force, she'd learned to trust instincts, both human and animal. "I'll escort you myself," she decided. "Something tells me this is just the beginning." At Metropolitan Hospital, the pediatric unit buzzed with activity. Dr. Eleanor Martinez, the attending physician, conducted a thorough examination of Michael, while the Hendersons waited anxiously in the hallway. Rusty had somehow managed to slip into the hospital unnoticed, and now sat quietly by Sarah's feet, his usual aloof demeanor replaced by an almost human-like concern. "The baby is approximately 6 weeks old," Dr. Martinez reported, joining them in the hallway. "He's well-fed, clean, and shows no signs of abuse or neglect. Whoever was caring for him before tonight was doing a good job." She paused, her expression troubled. "But there's something else. During the examination, I noticed a very small birthmark behind his left ear. It's quite distinctive, shaped like a crescent moon." Detective Chen's head snapped up. "A crescent moon birthmark." She pulled out her phone, fingers flying over the screen. 3 weeks ago, there was a report of a missing infant from St. Mary's Hospital in Manhattan. The baby disappeared from the maternity ward just hours after birth. "One of the identifying marks was a crescent-shaped birthmark," Sarah gasped, her hand finding George's. But if he was taken from the hospital, why would someone care for him for weeks, only to abandon him now? The answer came in an unexpected way. As they discussed the possibilities, a young nurse rushed into the hallway, her face pale. "Dr. Martinez, you need to see this." She thrust a tablet into the doctor's hands. On the screen was a news article from that morning. "Prominent judge's daughter dies in suspicious car accident." The article featured a photo of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Emily Crawford, daughter of federal Judge William Crawford, had died when her car went off the road that morning. She was 32 years old and had recently given birth to her first child, a son. "Look at the date," Detective Chen pointed out, showing the accident happened just hours before Rusty found Michael. As if on cue, Rusty stood up and meowed loudly, pawing at Sarah's leg. The elderly woman looked down at the cat, then back at the tablet. "There's more to this story," she said softly. "Much more." Detective Chen nodded, her mind already racing. Judge Crawford was known for his tough stance on organized crime, having presided over several high-profile cases involving the city's most dangerous criminal organizations. If his daughter had been involved somehow? A commotion at the end of the hallway interrupted her thoughts. 2 men in dark suits were speaking to the nurse at the station, showing what appeared to be federal badges. As they approached, Rusty's behavior changed dramatically. His fur stood on end and a low growl emerged from his throat. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The note's warning echoed in her mind. "They're watching." She looked at Detective Chen, who had subtly positioned herself between the approaching men and the room where baby Michael slept. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. A judge's daughter, a missing baby, a suspicious accident, and now mysterious federal agents, all connected by a stray cat who seemed to know far more than any animal should. As the men drew closer, Rusty slipped silently into Michael's room, followed quickly by Sarah. Something told her that keeping the cat close to the baby might be more important than anyone realized. The real question was, who could they trust? And how far would some people go to keep their secrets buried? The next 48 hours passed in a blur of tension and revelations. Detective Chen had quietly moved Michael to a secure wing of the hospital, listed under a different name. The Hendersons remained by his side, with Sarah refusing to leave despite George's gentle suggestions that she needed rest. Rusty had become a permanent fixture in the room, taking up position by the window where he could watch both Michael and the door. The 2 men in suits, who had identified themselves as Agents Miller and Thompson from the FBI, were kept at bay by a combination of hospital bureaucracy and Detective Chen's careful maneuvering. Something about their credentials hadn't sat right with her, and a quiet call to her contacts at the bureau had confirmed her suspicions. No agents by those names had been assigned to any cases involving Judge Crawford or his family. But it was what Sarah discovered while going through her phone that changed everything. She had been looking at old photos, trying to distract herself from the tension, when she found something strange. A picture from 6 months ago, taken in her front yard. It showed Rusty, as usual avoiding her attempts to pet him, but in the background was a woman walking past their house, the same woman from the news article, Emily Crawford. "Detective," Sarah called out, her voice trembling, I think Emily used to live in our neighborhood." Detective Chen studied the photo carefully. "This was taken 6 months ago. That would have been around the time she disappeared from public view. Her father claimed she was on an extended vacation, but—" "She was hiding," a new voice said. Everyone turned to find Dr. Martinez standing in the doorway, holding a manila envelope. "I did some digging. Emily Crawford was admitted to this hospital 4 times in the 3 months before she gave birth. Each time, she had injuries consistent with domestic abuse." The doctor spread several x-rays on the small table. Broken ribs, fractured wrist, multiple contusions. She always claimed they were accidents, but the pattern was clear. "What's more interesting is this." She pulled out a laboratory report. Her blood work showed high levels of stress hormones and signs of sustained fear response. She was terrified of someone. Sarah watched as Rusty suddenly perked up, his attention focused intently on the hallway. Moments later, they heard footsteps approaching. The cat's reaction was immediate. He moved to stand between Michael's crib and the door, his posture protective rather than threatening. An elderly man in an expensive suit appeared in the doorway. Judge William Crawford looked nothing like his public photos. His face was haggard, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. "I know who killed my daughter," he said without preamble, "and I know why they want my grandson." The judge closed the door behind him, checking twice to ensure it was secure. "Emily came to me 6 months ago, terrified. She had discovered something: documents, recordings, evidence of judicial corruption at the highest levels. Judges, prosecutors, even federal agents, all in the pocket of the Castellano crime family." He sank into a chair, his shoulders heavy with grief. "She was married to David Reynolds, a federal prosecutor. She found out he was one of them. When she threatened to expose everything, The judge's voice broke. She ran, changed her appearance, went into hiding. The only one who knew where she was her childhood friend, Maria." Sarah gasped. "Maria Garcia, the nurse who lived in the blue house down the street from us. She moved away suddenly a few months ago." "She didn't move," Judge Crawford said grimly. "She disappeared. They found her car at the bottom of the East River last week. Emily was trying to protect her son. She knew they would never stop looking for him, that they would use him to control me, to ensure my silence." Detective Chen leaned forward. "They're the false federal agents, Reynolds' men," the judge confirmed. "They're watching the hospitals, the police stations, everywhere they think she might have taken the baby, but they never thought to watch the strays." All eyes turned to Rusty, who sat calmly washing his paw as if he hadn't just been revealed as a key player in an elaborate plan to save a baby from a criminal conspiracy. "Emily used to feed him," Sarah remembered. "Every morning when she walked past our house, she was one of the few people he would let near him." The judge nodded, tears in his eyes. "The night before the accident, she called me, said she had a plan, that she had found someone she could trust. I thought she meant a person, but—" A soft meow interrupted him. Rusty had moved to the window again, his tail twitching in agitation. In the parking lot below, several dark SUVs were pulling up to the hospital entrance. "They found us," Detective Chen said, reaching for her phone. But before she could call for backup, the hospital's fire alarm began blaring. In the chaos that followed, as doctors and nurses began evacuating patients, Sarah noticed something strange. Rusty had disappeared. The hospital erupted into controlled chaos as staff followed evacuation protocols. Through the window, more dark SUVs arrived, their occupants moving with military precision. Detective Chen quickly assessed the situation, her years of experience telling her they were surrounded. "We need to move," she ordered, already unplugging Michael's monitoring equipment. They've cut off the obvious exits. Judge, how many men would Reynolds typically deploy? 2 full teams, minimum. 12 to 15 men, Crawford replied, his legal composure crumbling as he watched the orchestrated assault on the hospital. They're here for Michael. If they get him... They won't, Sarah interrupted with unexpected steel in her voice. She had picked up Michael, wrapping him securely against her chest. Rusty didn't go through all this just for us to fail now. As if summoned by his name, a loud crash echoed from somewhere down the hall, followed by shouts and the sound of running feet. Dr. Martinez, who had been monitoring the situation through the window, suddenly smiled. "Clever cat," she murmured. Through the glass, they could see Rusty darting across the parking lot, pursued by several of Reynolds' men. The cat carried something in his mouth that looked like a baby's blanket, a brilliant diversion. "The service elevator?" Dr. Martinez said quickly, moving to a panel in the wall that looked like a standard supply cabinet. Behind it was a small service elevator, rarely used except by maintenance staff. It goes down to the old tunnel system that connects to the medical school across the street. Most people don't even know it exists anymore. They moved quickly, cramming into the tight space. The elevator was designed for equipment, not people, but they managed to fit. As the doors closed, they heard the main door to Michael's room burst open. The descent seemed to take forever, the ancient machinery groaning with their weight. When they finally reached the basement level, they found themselves in a dimly lit tunnel that smelled of dust and disuse. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, and their footsteps echoed ominously off the concrete walls. "Which way?" George asked, supporting Sarah, who was still holding Michael close. Before anyone could answer, a familiar orange shape materialized from the shadows. Rusty, somehow having completed his diversion and found his way into the tunnel system, meowed softly and began walking purposefully down one of the corridors. "How did he—" Detective Chen began, but then shook her head. Questions about the cat's apparently supernatural abilities would have to wait. They followed Rusty through a maze of tunnels, the sound of pursuit growing more distant. The cat seemed to know exactly where he was going, never hesitating at intersections, always choosing their path with certainty. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they emerged into an abandoned subway maintenance station. Rusty led them to a rusted door that opened onto a platform of a rarely used subway line. "We can't stay here," Detective Chen said, checking her phone. "No signal. We need to get somewhere we can call for backup." A distant sound made them all freeze, footsteps in the tunnel they had just left. Reynolds' men had found their trail. Judge Crawford pulled out a small key from his pocket. "There's a safe house," he said quietly. "One that even Reynolds doesn't know about. I set it up years ago, when I first started receiving death threats, but we'll never make it through the city with them watching every street." Sarah looked down at Rusty, who was sitting calmly despite the tension around him. "Maybe we don't need to use the streets," she said slowly. "The subway tunnels must connect to other abandoned stations, and we seem to have a guide who knows his way around." As if in response, Rusty stood and walked further down the platform, looking back at them expectantly. Through the darkness, they could see more tunnel openings, a labyrinth of possibilities stretching out beneath the city. Detective Chen checked her weapon, their only defense if Reynolds' men caught up to them. "And it's not like we have much choice," she admitted. "But, Judge, you need to tell us everything. No more secrets. What exactly did Emily find? And why is Reynolds willing to kill for it?" The judge's face was grim in the dim emergency lighting. "It's not just about corruption," he said as they began to move, following Rusty into the darkness. "Emily found evidence of something much worse. Something that goes all the way to—" A shot rang out, echoing deafeningly in the confined space. Everyone ducked instinctively, but it was Judge Crawford who stumbled, red blooming across his expensive suit jacket. The gunshot's echo had barely faded when chaos erupted. Detective Chen returned fire, forcing their pursuers back into the tunnel, while George and Sarah dragged the wounded judge behind a defunct ticket booth. Michael, startled by the noise, began to cry, his wails bouncing off the station walls. "Dad!" Sarah pressed her hands against the judge's wound, but blood seeped between her fingers. Crawford's face was ashen, but his eyes remained clear and focused. "The evidence," he gasped, fumbling with his tie pin. Emily knew they wouldn't just look in obvious places. The pin came loose in his trembling fingers, revealing itself to be a tiny USB drive. Everything's here, the corruption, the murders, the offshore accounts, but most importantly, the children. Children? Detective Chen asked, firing another warning shot as shadows moved at the tunnel entrance. Reynolds isn't just protecting corrupt officials, Crawford wheezed. They're trafficking children, dozens of them, taken from hospitals, foster homes, even loving families. They use the legal system to make them disappear. Corrupt judges sign papers. Dirty cops look the other way. Emily, she found the pattern. Sarah held Michael closer, understanding dawning in her eyes. That's why she ran. She wasn't just protecting Michael from Reynolds. She was preventing him from becoming another victim, the judge confirmed. Reynolds' organization doesn't just traffic children, they place them with wealthy clients, create false paperwork, erase their true identities. Michael, they wanted him not just to control me, but because a judge's grandson would be valuable merchandise. Rusty, who had been pacing anxiously nearby, suddenly froze. His ears flattened against his head as new sounds emerged from a different tunnel. More footsteps, more voices. They were being surrounded. You need to go, Crawford insisted, pressing the USB drive into Sarah's hand. Get this to Agent Catherine Santos at the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. Only her, no one else. She's been building a case for years but never had enough evidence. We're not leaving you, Sarah protested, but the judge grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Listen to me, he said urgently. Emily trusted that cat to protect her son. Now I'm trusting you, both of you. His eyes moved between Sarah and Rusty. Sometimes the best guardians are the ones nobody suspects. Detective Chen's voice cut through the moment. We've got maybe 2 minutes before they reach us. Judge, can you move? Crawford shook his head, reaching inside his jacket to withdraw a second gun. Go. I'll buy you time. Before anyone could argue, Rusty darted forward and began pulling at Sarah's pant leg, urging her toward a maintenance door half hidden behind decades of grime. Detective Chen tried it, locked, but the hinges were weak with rust. A few solid kicks, and it groaned open. It's some kind of maintenance shaft, Chen reported, shining her flashlight into the darkness. Looks like it connects to another level. The voices were getting closer. Reynolds' men were coordinating their approach, their footsteps echoing from multiple directions. The judge raised his gun with a steady hand. Sarah, he said softly, Emily would be grateful. Now go. Keep him safe. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Sarah, Georges and Detective Chen slipped through the maintenance door with Michael, Rusty lingered. The cat looked at Judge Crawford for a long moment, then did something extraordinary. He sat down next to the wounded man, his posture alert and protective. No, Crawford whispered. Go with them. Protect Michael. Rusty didn't move. More remarkably, other shapes began emerging from the shadows, dozens of eyes glowing in the darkness. The station's rat population, normally shy and elusive, was gathering, and they seemed to be responding to something, to Rusty. Understanding dawned on the judge's face. My God, he breathed. You're not just a cat, are you? The first of Reynolds and men appeared at the far end of the platform. The judge raised his gun, but before he could fire, something unprecedented happened. At some silent signal from Rusty, the rats surged forward, hundreds of them, an unstoppable wave of fury and teeth. The men's shouts of surprise turned to screams of panic. In the chaos that followed, no one noticed a small group emerging from a different maintenance exit 6 blocks away. Sarah, still clutching Michael, looked back as sounds of gunfire and screaming echoed up from the tunnels below. George supported her as Detective Chen led them through empty pre-dawn streets. 3 days later, the headlines were inescapable. Federal agents had raided multiple locations across the city, arresting judges, lawyers, and law enforcement officials. The evidence provided by the late Emily Crawford had blown the trafficking ring wide open. Judge Crawford, though wounded, had survived his stand in the subway station. The official report mentioned nothing about rats. In a small house in the Witness Protection Program, Sarah Henderson sat in a rocking chair, gently soothing Michael to sleep. George worked in their new garden, planting vegetables and installing a small pond. They had a new name, a new life, and a new purpose, protecting the child that fate had entrusted to them. A soft meow drew Sarah's attention to the window. There sat Rusty, looking exactly as he had that first night. But now, Sarah knew better. The cat's eyes held too much wisdom, too much awareness to be entirely natural. "Was it you all along?" she whispered. "Were you watching over Emily? Over all of them?" Rusty blinked slowly, then turned his head toward the street. There, Sarah saw something that made her breath catch. A small girl, crying on the sidewalk, clearly lost. And from around the corner came another cat, this one grey and sleek, moving with purpose toward the child. Sarah smiled, understanding at last. Some guardians wore badges, some wore robes, and some wore fur, each serving in their own way, protecting those who needed it most. Rusty stretched lazily and jumped down from the windowsill, padding over to where Michael slept. He curled up beneath the crib as he did every night, ready to stand guard for as long as needed. Outside, the grey cat was leading the lost girl toward a police officer who had just turned onto the street. Sarah looked down at the sleeping baby, then at the cat who had changed their lives. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was thanking Rusty, Emily, fate, or some combination of all three. In the growing light of dawn, as the city awakened to another day, Sarah realized that sometimes the most extraordinary guardians were the ones that no one noticed at all. And somewhere out there, other cats were watching, waiting, ready to guard those who needed them most. 10 years passed like leaves caught in a gentle breeze, each season bringing changes both subtle and profound. Michael Henderson, now a bright-eyed 10-year-old with his mother's kind smile and his grandfather's strong chin, had grown into a remarkable child with an unusual affinity for animals, especially cats. The Hendersons' new home in a quiet Colorado town had become something of a sanctuary. What started as a simple garden had evolved into a sprawling haven for strays and lost creatures. Local children jokingly called it the Cat Lady's house. But there was nothing eccentric about Sarah Henderson's operation. Each animal that found its way to their door seemed to have a purpose, a mission that only became clear with time. Judge Crawford, now retired and walking with a slight limp from his wound, visited regularly under the guise of a family friend. He had devoted his retirement to working with Agent Santos, creating a nationwide network to protect vulnerable children. Their organization, officially a child advocacy non-profit, had an unusually high success rate at locating missing children, success that often involved mysterious reports of cats, leading police to exactly the right location. Rusty remained a constant presence. Though he had aged little in the decade since that fateful night, his orange fur had perhaps grayed slightly around the muzzle, but his eyes retained that same ancient wisdom that had first caught Sarah's attention. He had become Michael's unofficial guardian, accompanying him to school by following along rooftops and fences, always watching, always alert. On a crisp autumn evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Detective Chen, now Chief Chen, made one of her regular visits. She brought news that sent ripples through their carefully constructed piece. "David Reynolds escaped during transfer," she announced without preamble, 3 days ago. Sarah's hand found George's under the table. Michael, who knew a carefully edited version of his history, looked up from his homework with interest. Rusty, dozing by the fireplace, opened one eye. "But that's not why I'm here," Chen continued, placing a manila envelope on the table. "We found something in Emily's old apartment. The building was finally being demolished, and behind a loose brick." She pulled out a letter, the paper yellowed with age. Sarah opened it with trembling fingers and began to read aloud. "To whoever is protecting my son, if you're reading this, then what I feared has come to pass, but my plan worked. I know it seems impossible to believe, but the guardian I chose for Michael isn't human. I discovered something during my investigation, something older and stranger than corruption and crime. They've been here all along, watching, waiting, protecting. I first noticed when I was documenting cases of missing children. In every successful recovery, there were reports of cats leading searchers to the right location, cats causing distractions at crucial moments. cats appearing just when hope was lost. At first I thought it was coincidence. Then I met Rusty. He's not just a cat. None of them are just cats. They're guardians, choosing to appear as cats because who pays attention to another stray? They've been protecting children for longer than our civilizations have existed. I don't know what they are, not really, but I know they're real, and I know they're good. Rusty showed me things I can barely comprehend. There's a network of them across the world, silently watching over the innocent. When I realized what Reynolds was involved in, I knew I couldn't trust human institutions alone to protect my son. So I made a choice. I entrusted Michael to Rusty's care, knowing he would find the right people to help raise my boy. If you're reading this, you're those people. Thank you for being worthy of a guardian's trust. Love him, protect him, and know that you're not alone in your vigil. With eternal gratitude, Emily Crawford. The room fell silent as Sarah finished reading. Michael had moved to sit by Rusty, his hand buried in the cat's fur. Outside, shadows moved across the garden as other cats emerged from their hiding places, their eyes reflecting the dying light. "All this time," George whispered, "we thought we were chosen randomly." "There's no such thing as random," Michael said with the simple wisdom of a child. "Rusty chose us because he knew we'd understand." As if in response, a sound caught their attention, a soft scratching at the back door. Chen opened it to reveal a thin black cat, supporting an exhausted toddler who had clearly been wandering for hours. The child's clothes were dirty, and a quick check of recent alerts confirmed she had been abducted from her bed 2 towns over. Within hours, the child was safely returned to her family, and the black cat had vanished. But everyone in the Henderson household understood this was why they had been chosen, why their home had become a waypoint for strays and lost souls alike. That night, as Michael slept under Rusty's watchful eye, Sarah stood at the window looking out at their garden. Dozens of cats moved through the shadows, some heading out into the night, others returning from unknown missions. Each one, she now knew, was a guardian, part of an ancient network dedicated to protecting the most vulnerable. Reynolds was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, but Sarah wasn't afraid. Their home was protected by something far older and more powerful than any human malice. The guardians had chosen them, trusted them, included them in their eternal mission. In his room, Michael stirred in his sleep, smiling as Rusty curled closer. The cat's eyes gleamed in the darkness, reflecting a wisdom and power that had existed long before humans built their cities and would continue long after. For in every city, in every shadow, the guardians watched and waited, ready to protect those who needed them most. And so the Henderson house remained, a sanctuary, a waypoint, a place where lost children found their way home, where guardians could rest between missions, and where an ordinary family had become part of something extraordinary. Not through magic or destiny, but through the simple choice to be kind, to protect the vulnerable, and to believe that sometimes the greatest guardians were the ones that no one noticed at all. In the garden, under the light of the moon, the cats gathered, their silent council continuing as it had for millennia. And in the darkness, a new chapter was already beginning, as somewhere, another child cried out in the night, and another guardian answered the call. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of captivating stories. I trust you found today's narrative as engaging as I did. If you enjoyed this exploration into fascinating and compelling narratives, kindly indicate your appreciation by liking this video. Are you watching on mobile? Show your appreciation with a double tap for hype. For more captivating stories and journeys into the heart of compelling storytelling, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss a single upload. Your thoughts and interpretations are most welcome. Please share your perspectives on today's story in the comments below. And if you believe others would find this content engaging, please consider sharing the video with your network. Until our next journey into the world of captivating tales, I bid you farewell.